Why is Booger McFarland out there saying that the Huskies can't play big boy football with the other teams?
I don't know. We're going to have to get Booger on the show, though. Because he's been mean to me on the show. Even if he doesn't even remember that. He was. He's a little feisty. I don't know. I think he has respected Washington. I don't think there's any question about it, but he just doesn't think physically, and I get some of it. I mean, just from a physical standpoint, Mike, I pulled out my Texas board right here. I had Texas a couple times this year, and just the number of horses they have, especially at the defensive line of scrimmage. I mentioned to you Tavondre Sweat at 6'4", 365, but Alfred Collins, 6'5", 320, Vernon Broughton, 6'4", 300, Byron Murphy, 6'1", 310, 6'2", 300 transfer. Their edges are 6'6", 260, Barron Sorrell, 6'4", 260. I mean, they got dudes 6, 7, 8 deep on their defensive line. I saw Michigan this year. We could do the same thing with Michigan. They got a 6'4", 340-pound difference maker. They've got a bunch of edge guys that are 260, a couple other D tackles. Chris Jenkins, remember the great Chris Jenkins for Carolina? His son is one of their stud D tackles. Like they go 6, 7 deep on their defensive line, as does Alabama. So if you're comparing just the raw goods of what you have, now Braylon Trice can match up with any of them. Tuli Nasanoa can match up with any of them. But after that, you start to not have as many big boys as they do. And it leads a Booger McFarland. Go ahead if you got the sound. A Booger McFarland to say, oh, you don't have the sound? Yeah. To say, out of the four, when it comes to big boy football, they may be the most challenged physically.
And yet, Joe Klatt kind of went in exactly the opposite direction.
This is a great matchup for Washington. Texas's biggest weak spot is their pass defense. We've seen it all year. I've seen it. Heck, even the game I did against Texas, Kansas State came in as one of the best rushing teams in the country, like 5th in the country running the football. Texas took that away with Tavondre Sweat. You guys saw how good they were on the defensive line. And Kansas State was able to throw the ball to get back into the game. We saw that with TCU. So now they're going to face the best passing attack in the country.
Totally co-sign. So I mentioned all that beef up front. On the back end, they play a true freshman corner. On the back end, they play some safeties that are a little bit more run safeties than they are space safeties, that like to come up and fill in their quarters defense. They're not the most exotic defense either, right? They're very, very, as you say, sound in college football or in the NFL. Like, hey, we're not going to bust coverages. We're not going to be overly exotic, and they are not. They got a pretty good nickel. A guy that's got a chance to play at the NFL level, a guy that loves Buda Baker and everything about Buda and wanted to be Buda, and talked to Pete Kwiatkowski and what do I have to do to be Buda Baker? So they got a pretty good little active nickelback. But that is the group. Got one good coverage linebacker. The other guy is a true freshman as well. So there are vulnerabilities there. There are going to be plenty of opportunities. And if you've just faced, and I think this is an advantage for Washington, they faced in the Oregon Ducks twice a very similar stout defensive line. An Oregon Ducks defensive line that also went 7 or 8 deep. An Oregon Ducks defensive line, Salk, that in the middle of it, had 330-pound 6th-year and 7th-year players that on the edges had a Brandon Dorless and a Birch that are both going to be NFL kind of guys at 290 pounds. And what did they do to them? What did they do to that big defensive line? What did they do game plan-wise in Vegas? They ran them. And here's a bubble screen, and you're going to run sideline to sideline, and we're going to wear you down, and we're going to use your size against you. And I thought to, put together, and Kalen, in texting with him afterwards, when I congratulated him, his first comment was, hey man, don't congratulate me. Our staff was A1. They put together plans on both sides of the ball against an Oregon team who physically, you could have said the same thing. And why Vegas, made them 9.5-point favorites. You could say the exact same thing from a physical standpoint, man to man, bigger, stronger, longer, faster. But when push came to shove, man, your plan, your people, and your strengths came to life.
Their big win this year, obviously, is Alabama, right? Early in the year in September, they win by 10. Their one loss this year was to Oklahoma, right?
Yep.
What did Oklahoma do to beat them?
Exactly what I just said. Absolutely wore them down. Absolutely just moved them and RPO'd them and ran them and tempoed them and bubble screened them and quick RPO slants. And there were times that old Tavondre could not even run. I could send you the clip of it. I mean, it was amazing because they didn't substitute. So they just kept their guys on the field, and they made those big guys empty the tank, and they just unfortunately could not keep up with them that day in that rivalry game. Now, your system is different. You don't run Oklahoma's no huddle tempo and do all of that crazy stuff. But you got components, and you got ways to keep them on the field and wear them down, and that will absolutely be the plan 3 weeks from
They
now.
had a couple other close games. I mean, the Huskies played a lot of close games this year and found a lot of ways to win it. They did have a few. This isn't like Oregon where they blew everybody else out. They snuck by Kansas State by 3. They got by TCU by 3. So they've had some of those games where, they're tested and how to play closer games.
A little different, though. In every one of those games, they were up by 3 touchdowns in the second half, and then they didn't have the closing instinct.
Gave it back.
They gave it all back. They were up 28. They gave it all back. They were up 21. They gave it all back. They were up in the second half, and they just couldn't finish the deal until they finally did over the last stretch of their couple games. I mean, it's going to be awesome. Quinn Ewers is a talented QB on the other side. They've got some dynamic people. They, too, have a big physical offensive line. Like, this one, is a matchup. I think both of them. I think Alabama, Michigan the same way. I mean, it's a bummer there had to be a loser. It's a bummer that Florida State's not in this. It's a bummer that Georgia's not in it. I mean, if there was ever to be a year to have a 12-team playoff, I think even Oregon matched up against other teams not named Washington would have a terrific chance against an Ohio State, against a Michigan, against some of these other teams. This would have been the year to have a 12-team playoff. As much as any year I can ever remember.
So close, so tight,
That's right.
All of those
That's
teams.
right. Exactly.